this is Misti Green, and you're listening to the I Lead Misty Blue podcast, where strategy meets soul and faith finds its voice. Pull up a chair, the table is set. There's a kind of lie that doesn't show up in a way that feels obvious. And maybe that's what makes it so easy to live inside of for far longer than we were ever meant to. It doesn't come in loud or even disruptive. It doesn't even immediately feel like something's wrong. In many ways, it can actually present itself as movement, as what looks like progress and feels like purpose. And sometimes it can even mirror growth. It can feel like ambition, like forward motion. It can feel like you're doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing. And if you're not paying close attention, you can spend a lot of time moving in a direction that was never truly aligned for you. Hoping that peace will eventually meet you somewhere along the way. You keep praying God will sustain it. You keep believing that maybe if you push just a little harder and stay a little longer, if you love a little deeper, achieve a little bit more, eventually things will settle. And I think if we're honest, most of us have been there in some way. Maybe it was staying too long in a job because you were loyal, even though every single room you walked into made you feel like your strengths, though they were needed, they also needed to be softened or boxed. They had to be boxed in just to make other people feel comfortable. Maybe it was staying connected to relationships or friendships that you quietly outgrew because history made letting go feel so hard, and the uncertainty of what would come after gave you pause. Maybe it was constantly navigating tension, passive aggressive comments, inconsistency, criticism, or environments where you never fully felt safe or you never felt capable to just be, to exhale and be exactly who you are. And sometimes, if we're being really honest, it can even happen in spaces that are supposed to feel spiritually safe. Churches where gossip is really the backbone to what's happening, the backbiting that quietly lives underneath the worship music. Spaces where appearances are protected far more than people. Places where you slowly start shrinking parts of yourself just to stay accepted. Not because anyone wakes up wanting unhealthy things, and not because we're weak, and not even because we're intentionally disconnected from God, but because sometimes we adapt to environments we were only meant to survive temporarily. I'm going to say that again. There are times in life where you will adapt to an environment that you were only meant to survive temporarily. And little by little, the tension in that environment will start to feel normal, where anxiety can often become your baseline, where rest starts to feel unfamiliar, and where there becomes even a sense of guilt behind needing rest. See, your body is present, but internally it feels like you're constantly bracing for something. You're constantly waiting for the full floor to drop or for the ceiling to fall. And what makes it confusing is that from the outside, life may still look full. You're functioning, you're showing up, you're looking good, you're producing, you're even helping others. You're handling all the responsibilities, and maybe even you're succeeding in ways that other people admire, but internally something still feels unsettled. And maybe that's the part people don't talk about enough. See, we don't like to have these real and raw conversations. Sometimes life just gets heavy. It doesn't typically happen all at once, and oftentimes it's not even dramatic. It just slowly, over time, sets in as a heaviness. You keep carrying responsibilities, you keep showing up for people, you keep trying to hold things together, and you remain hopeful and faithful, and you try even to believe the things you've been praying for will eventually start to make sense. And somewhere in all of that, without even realizing it, you can slowly become disconnected from yourself. Not because you don't love God, and not because your faith isn't real and functioning, and not even because you intentionally walked away from anything that was meant for your purpose, but because survival and loyalty, grief and disappointment, pressure coupled with responsibility, and even love can become heavy when they're carried for far too long without rest. And sometimes that heaviness shows up extremely quietly as restlessness that never fully settles, a kind of emotional exhaustion you can't quite explain to others, like a constant mental noise that makes it difficult to truly rest. The feeling of always carrying something internally, even during moments that are supposed to feel peaceful, you are unable to be where your feet are. And eventually, if you're honest, you realize you don't just feel tired, you feel disconnected. You feel like a shell, not completely disconnected from God and not completely disconnected from your life. You just feel disconnected from peace, from stillness, from yourself. But see, most people don't stop there. No, no, no. What we try to do, we try to move through it. We try to build our way out of it. We try to feel the discomfort by even moving faster. I found myself there. So the chase, what happens? It deepens. You move toward money because stability and options feel like the answer. You move toward recognition because being seen feels like it might finally affirm something within you and it might show others, see, I have made it. You move toward relationships because connection feels like it might quiet whatever still feels unsettled internally. And for a while, all those pieces, they work. There's a sense of relief in motion, in movement. There's a sense that maybe things are finally shifting, and maybe, just maybe, we're finally getting somewhere. But over time, something else becomes clear. The relief does not stay. And the temporary satisfaction was just that, temporary, and it doesn't hold. What you reached for gives you something in the moment, but it doesn't carry beyond that moment. And instead of resolving what you felt in the beginning, it often deepens it because now you've invested more of yourself into something that still hasn't brought you to the place of peace. And I think that's where the lie behind the chase really begins to reveal itself. It quietly convinces us that the next thing will finally be enough. The next level, opportunity, relationship, and even the next version of ourselves. Because that's what we're constantly trying to do, right? Reinvent ourselves to become the best version of ourselves. So, in that, we believe it will finally be enough. But what we're trying to satisfy isn't always external in the way that we think it is. Sometimes we're really trying to feel emotional exhaustion with achievement and loneliness with attention, confusion with constant movement because in motion, there's no time to question yourself, and silence with noise, unable to sit even for a moment in solitude with ourselves. And while none of those things are inherently wrong, they were never meant to carry the full weight of our identity, of our peace. I think for a lot of people, especially people who had to become strong early in life, this can be difficult to untangle because the chase often starts as survival, trying to build stability, trying to build safety, and trying to create a life that felt different from what you came from. And there's nothing wrong with that desire. There's nothing wrong with ambition, and there's nothing wrong with growth. There's nothing wrong with wanting meaningful relationships and seeking purpose and creating stability and even building a beautiful life. There's nothing wrong with that. The problem is when we become so used to surviving that we no longer recognize when something is draining us instead of sustaining us. Because eventually something starts shifting. It is usually extremely quiet when the shift begins. See, what once felt motivating starts to feel heavy. And what once energized you will start to feel draining. What once felt aligned will begin to feel forced. And if you're used to movement, that shift can feel uncomfortable at first because stillness feels unfamiliar when you've spent years surviving through motion. But sometimes the discomfort, it's not punishment. Sometimes it's a simple invitation. It's an invitation to stop forcing, to stop proving, and to stop building your identity around being needed and validated and productive or constantly in motion. It's an invitation to return, to simply rest and breathe, and to realign yourself and recalibrate, to recenter your life in Christ without feeling like you have to earn peace first. And when that becomes the center again, things start shifting internally before they ever shift externally. See, you stop asking people to fill spaces that were never meant to be filled. You stop needing constant validation to prove something, and you stop chasing environments that only tolerate you instead of truly validating you. You slowly begin to feel clarity returning. It's not dramatic and it doesn't happen overnight. Usually it's quiet. It looks like outgrowing things without bitterness, creating healthier boundaries without guilt, recognizing that peace is not found in constantly proving yourself. And sometimes it looks like allowing yourself to pause long enough to hear what your spirit has been trying to say for a very long time. Because contentment doesn't mean you stop growing, it changes where you grow from. You're no longer building your life from emptiness, and you're building from a place that is already full. Philippians 4 reminds us that contentment is learned. And I think that matters because most of us were taught how to chase long before we were ever taught how to rest. So if you find yourself in a season where something no longer feels aligned, where what once drove you now feels heavier than it should, where anxiety has become the baseline, where it's been normalized, or where your spirit has been trying to tell you something needs to shift, you don't have to rush to replace what you're leaving behind. See, there's value in sitting in the quiet long enough for clarity to return. Because maybe this season is not about finding the next thing to chase. Maybe it's about returning to yourself, returning to peace and joy, and returning to God. If this met you in a season where something has been shifting, where what once drove you no longer feels the same, or where you found yourself chasing something that still isn't settling, I invite you to go back and sit with the episodes, Keep Being That Ball, and God's Permissive Will versus His Perfect Will, where we talk about how what is meant for you will show up, how you don't have to bend or change who you are when you're truly in alignment, and how real peace and stability are found in God's perfect will rather than simply in what He may allow, but what He never truly authored for your life. If this conversation resonated, share it with someone who may need it and stay connected. You can find me on Instagram at Misti M. Green or at ileadmb.com. This is Misti Green, and you've been listening to the I Lead Misti Blue podcast, where strategy meets soul and faith finds its voice. I'll meet you back here next time.